Hello, CPAC. Good to be here. I think our music was almost as good as your music, Dennis, coming out. I don't know. That was pretty good stuff. Thank you all for being here. I'm Genevieve Wood of the Heritage Foundation, where I'm also the senior contributor for the Daily Signal. You can find all of our stuff at dailysignal.com. But we're going to start our panel today first with an introduction of our panelists. You've already met Dennis Prager, national talk show host, also founder of Prager University. A lot of good stuff on that website, Dennis. I love going there.
Thank you.
And then we're joined by two members of Congress. First, Congressman Jeb Hensarling from the great state of Texas. And a newer addition to Washington, Senator Mike Lee from the great state of Utah. I was delighted when I saw this panel because I'm like, these are smart people who can talk about things in ways that we all understand. So we're delighted that you all are here. Dennis, you set this up well. Washington is broken. But I want to begin by asking Senator Lee and Congressman Hensarling, you all wrote recently in National Review that Washington is broken and that Congress is the one that actually has to fix it. What do you mean by that?
What we meant by that is the fact that most of our laws are no longer made by elected representatives of the people. This is a problem. This is surprising still to many Americans, but I keep two visual aids in my office to explain this. One set of documents that is in my office is 11 feet tall and it's 80,000 pages long. And it consists of the federal regulations issued just last year. Next to it, I have a different set of documents. It's only a few inches tall and a few hundred pages long. Those are the laws passed by Congress last year. Most of our laws, measured by volume, are no longer made by people who ever stand for election. And this is a big problem. It's one of the reasons why Chairman Hensarling and I got together to form the Article 1 project to reclaim this. Our view is that, even though you'll sometimes hear members of Congress complain about this, as if we were somehow the victims in this process, as if we were the victims. We're being beat up by these federal regulators. Well, we gave it to them. It was Congress that created these agencies. It was Congress that gave these agencies de facto lawmaking power. It's only Congress that can restore them, and so that's why Chairman Hensarling and I are doing this.
Congressman Hensarling, we hear complaints, however, from congressmen all the time, and congresswomen, I guess I should say. Our hands are tied, as though you didn't give up the power, that somebody took it from you. I often hear people blaming President Obama for going around Congress or for agencies for doing all these things. Are you telling me that you all are complaining and you actually have the power to do something about it?
Well, frankly, it's both. There has been executive overreaching. There have been negligence in Article 3 of the Constitution. There's been overreaching there. But as one commentator put it, there has been underreaching in the United States Congress. We have largely outsourced Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution to the executive, which by definition ought to be unconstitutional in the first place. And so what Mike and I are trying to do is to sensitize our fellow members of Congress just how bad the problem is. We all remember what Madison wrote, that there are more examples of the loss of freedom through gradual and silent encroachment than by violent and sudden usurpations. And so this is something that's gradual. It actually dates back all the way to the Wilson administration, where it took root. It started to grow in the Roosevelt administration. It became overgrown in the LBJ administration, and now it's choking us to death in the Obama administration. But again, there has been a self-enfeeblement of Congress. We are losing the rule of law to the discretion of regulators, and thus goes separation of powers, due process, and thus will go our prosperity and freedom if we don't arrest it now.
Okay, and we're going to talk about how to fix it, but before we get specifically to that, Dennis, I want to ask you, when you think, I mean, this is a massive problem, what are some of the best examples of how this plays out today?
To understand this, in my view, is to understand that the left has an inherent advantage over us. They seek power, and we seek less power. So there is an immediate disadvantage to us. Vote for me, I will reduce the government. versus vote for me, I will expand the government and give you even more than you now have. This is a huge problem for us. It's happening everywhere. You've mentioned the executive overreach, but what about judicial overreach? The left understands, the truth is, if the left wins, and this is why I'm going crazy that Republicans are not united, I don't care who your candidate is, we have to defeat the Democrats. I mean, there is no other important thing. Nothing else is important. I just want to, it's driving me crazy, because if they appoint the successor to the late, great Antonin Scalia, they don't even need the presidency and they don't even need Congress. They make laws in the Supreme Court because they will use whatever they want. One very quick anecdote on that. I was once the moderator in Idaho of the 9th Circuit annual retreat. I don't know why, they invited me by accident. I think they had another Prager in mind, but it was really something. And a former member of the California Supreme Court was there, and he said, and I'm very close to exact quote, but it's a paraphrase, he said, the purpose of a judge is to conquer poverty and fight racism and bring about equality in America. And I looked at him and I said, with all respect, Justice, that is the purpose of a politician, and that is the purpose of a talk show host. That is not the purpose of a judge. You went into the wrong profession.
Let's talk about how to fix it. There is something that you all, along with about 10 members of Congress within the House and Senate, Senator Lee and Representative Hensarling, had started called the Article 1 Project. So you actually put a plan together to get this thing back in order, to go back and what you would call reconstitutionalize the federal government. How do you start the process?
You start the process by putting forward legislation that would help Congress reclaim its constitutional authority. Its lawmaking power, which consists not only of reining in the regulatory delegation that we've committed to the executive branch, but also limiting executive discretion, reclaiming our power of the purse, and ending government by cliff. So we put together this group of 10 members of Congress, senators and representatives alike, and we're going to put forward legislation in each of these areas. We're dividing up into groups, that each of which will produce pieces of legislation designed to help us reclaim this power.
Representative Hensarling, what does that look like when it comes to, say, the power of the purse? How do you put that into legislation to get that moving?
Well, it's not all legislation. Part of it is changing the culture of the House and the Senate. Mm-hmm. I mean, much of this is within our power. Number one, it was in, I believe, Federalist 58, where the power of the purse was said to be the most complete and effectual weapon under the Constitution for the people's representatives to have redress of grievances. It's that important. It was recognized by the founders to be a critical tool of Congress. And instead, in many cases, we now have these so-called independent agencies that write their own budget with faceless, nameless, unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats. We don't even know their names, and yet they have this control over us. We can take that back. The first step we have to do is we have to get over showdown, shutdown phobia. It is Congress that has the power of the purse. Now, I'm not advocating a shutdown. That is not what I'm advocating. But what I'm advocating is that it is time for us to start funding the Republican Congress's priorities of we the people, and not the president's priorities. And that has to be done through the power of the purse. But one last thing I would add, we are operating under a 1974 Budget Act that was written in the post-Watergate era by a Democrat supermajority. This is insane. It was built to be a spending machine. It was not built to be a savings machine for we the people. So part of it is legislative, going back and ensuring that the whole apparatus of the budget process favors elected representatives over the unelected bureaucrats and ensures that it favors saving and not spending.
Dennis, so isn't this a PR battle too? I mean, this is something Republicans run up against all the time, and I should say conservatives more than Republicans. This whole, we want to be fiscally responsible. We don't believe that you should be able to spend this without it going through a certain committee or the right process. And yet every time somebody tries to take that stand, they're told you just want to shut down the government.
It is a PR battle. Everything is a PR battle. We have not won the hearts and minds of the American people. We haven't even won the hearts and minds. We've won the hearts, but not the minds of many conservatives. We have forgotten what we stand for and the moral significance of limited government. Big government not only is the antithesis of what the founders wanted, it also makes a worse citizen. The more you rely on the government, the less you rely on yourself, your family. Remember at the Democratic convention, Julia?
Yes.
Remember Julia? The woman, and this was in a cartoon form, the life of Julia from birth to death. There was no husband, there was no male. You are literally, for the left, you single women, you are married to the government, the state. And they even said, that's the only thing we have in common, Americans, the government. So yes, it is a PR battle, but we're not winning the PR. We have to know how to make the battle. And one, please, 20-second ad. I founded Prager University, which had 70 million views last year, 70 million. And I beg you, it's 5-minute courses, it's free. I'm not asking you for money, donations, nothing. Watch it, send it. This is the PR battle. If we win the minds, we win America. If we lose the minds, and they go to college. Conservatives send their kids to college and pay $50,000 to have their kids come home with the opposite values with which they sent them.
Yeah. Amen. Senator Lee, it's very hard to take something back that you've already given away, right? Yes. It's kind of like anytime you create a government program, it's very hard to ever get rid of it. You all have given a lot of power away. You've given a lot of power, and I'm not saying you specifically, but as you all wrote in your op-ed for the National Review, this has been a problem for years, both the Republican administrations, Democrat administrations. So this is not something we just got to fix what we did last year. How do you start taking the power back, the things that you've actually given away?
Jeb Hensarling referred to this a moment ago when he talked about the need to change the culture within Congress, and to change the American culture to the extent necessary to get voters to be enthusiastic about this issue. It's sometimes hard to get people to focus on separation of powers in the abstract. But when people understand how it affects their lives, they start to care more about it. When people understand that the federal regulations on the books today cost the American economy $2 trillion every single year. This is up, by the way, 7-fold from when I was in law school, where the regulatory compliance costs averaged about $300 billion a year, which is still too much. But when people understand that $2 trillion annual corporate compliance cost, regulatory compliance cost, that does not just fall on corporations. It does not just fall on wealthy people. And in fact, this burden is borne disproportionately by America's poor and America's middle class, all of whom pay for this. Pay for basically every cent of this. They pay for it every time they buy something because goods and services are made more expensive. And they also pay for it with diminished wages and unemployment. And so when we help people understand this, we can help reverse this trend. It does, as you say, have a one-way ratchet kind of an effect. And it's made harder still by the fact that this has been happening for about a century, intensely over the last 80 years, and under the leadership of both Republicans and Democrats. But we can still turn it around. This is still our government. It's still of us and by us and for us, and not for Washington, D.C. And once we get that message out there, we are going to win this.
Well, to state the obvious, rarely has there been less faith in Washington institutions. It is a wonderful opportunity we have before us. I think we're seeing this obviously manifesting itself in this election season. I mean, people know today you can't even go and dig a hole in your backyard without at least 14 different permits from the EPA. They are understanding that today they have smaller paychecks and smaller bank accounts, and that Washington is a large portion of this. The sheer weight, volume, expense in control of Washington bureaucrats is bringing them down. And so part of what we have to say is, again, going back to the power of the purse, let us exercise that power of the purse. And I'll clean up the quote slightly, but to quote a rather earthy, quotable Texan, President Lyndon Baines Johnson, if you grab them by their budgets, their hearts and minds will soon follow.
We'll let that sink in for just a moment. Dennis, you talk to people on your radio show all the time from all over the country. How well do you think they understand what the problem is?
This is the $64,000 question. Look, I have a few million listeners, and I presume that the majority of them are conservative. But I learned very early on that conservatives don't know how to make the arguments either, because we haven't been taught them. The so-called greatest generation, and I didn't say so-called to put them down. My father fought 3 years in the Pacific. I adore that generation, but that's what they're called, at least by Tom Brokaw and some others, the greatest generation. But they failed in one terrible way, and I don't blame them either, but we have to recognize it. They didn't pass on what they were given. Americans have forgotten that American is an idea, not a nationality, certainly not an ethnicity. It is an idea. The American idea is lost. Everything you're saying is so important, and take the regulation issue. If these terrific, and they are terrific, give them a hand, will you? Because these are our fighters. These are great guys. If you were to make this argument to a total mixture take from what was once called a phone book, take 1,000 names from a phone book, and you were to say, you know what, we have to diminish the number, reduce the number of regulations, you know what the other side will say? Ah, there they are, letting corporate America take over. We need more regulations so that we can control these corporations that are taking over America. And that's what we have to fight. And that goes even back to a more fundamental idea. They don't understand that the only conqueror of poverty in the history of Earth has been capitalism.
Talk about the regulation piece, because that's one of the four. You kind of have basically 4 action steps you want to take. What does it look like to regain the regulatory power that's been given away?
First thing we need to do is pass the REINS Act. The REINS Act is a legislative proposal. It's an acronym. It stands for Regulations from the Executive in Need of Scrutiny. It says that anytime there's a new major rule, a rule with a significant economic impact issued by a federal regulatory body, that it may not take effect until Congress affirmatively enacts it into law.
And right now, that doesn't have to happen.
Doesn't have to happen. It just takes effect. So here's how it works. Congress basically delegates the lawmaking power. Imagine if we passed a law that says we shall have clean air, and you know what idiot's going to vote against that? And then we say, and we hereby give to the EPA the power to decide what clean air is, what pollution is,
and how to clean it up,
and what happens, what kind of punishments you face as a polluter. And by the way, the same people who make those laws are also enforcing them, which is a big no-no under the Constitution. You don't do that. The REINS Act would change that so that it puts this job back in the hand of Congress. Congress would treat these as legislative proposals. The next step would be to pass a regulatory budget law, a law saying here is the total amount of regulatory compliance costs that we're willing to impose on the American economy. Do not exceed this. If you want to add regulations, you've got to take something else out so that we do not extend beyond that cost.
Well, Mike is 100% right on the program. But again, we're also going to have to change our own culture in Congress, and that is start to take responsibility. How easy it is to point your finger at some bureaucrat and say, I didn't believe in this. I'm sorry he's doing it to you. I'm sorry that you can't dig the hole in your backyard. I'm sorry that you can't determine your own private property rights. But this bureaucrat has said something otherwise. We can stop that with what Mike described as the REINS Act. I mean, we've got to awaken to the fact that it's not Congress that controls clean air lawmaking, it's the EPA. It's no longer Congress that creates laws over workplace safety, it's OSHA. It's no longer Congress that creates laws for consumer protection. It's the Orwellian name Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, where one unaccounted, unelected bureaucrat can decide what credit card goes in your wallet and whether or not you can keep your banker if you like them. That has got to change, and it has to start with the courage of Congress to take responsibility and to take back the Article 1, Section 1 lawmaking authority.
Nice. But now, Dennis, as you well know, part of the problem in Washington is that Congress just can't get anything done. And this is why we need a president that will act on his own when Congress just won't do their own job, right? Isn't that right?
Well, that's their argument. And if it weren't the president, then look, Congress can't act, so the Supreme Court's going to have to act on its own. That's why the fundamental issue is power. The left wants power. Wherever it can have it, it will use it. And right now, the demotion of Congress, because you control the purse strings in particular, is a #1 project. They would like you to be an echo chamber for the policies that they care about. And we have to fight back, and we have to fight smart. We have to know what it is. They want to control the country because, as I said in my opening comments, they admire the French Revolution, not the American Revolution. If you show a picture of the founders, you know, these great photos, the epic paintings of the founders signing the Declaration of Independence, the congressional signing, the Constitution. Do you know if you show that now to the average college kid, you know what they see? We see great men creating the greatest country that was ever made. They see rich, white slaveholders. That is the undoing of the American Revolution. I don't mean this in some poetic way. They're undoing it. Mm-hmm. And it includes the power of Congress to represent we the people.
That's right. I will tell you, we at the Heritage Foundation, we did a study, and it was a market research project where we looked at what does the public understand about the Constitution, but also the roles of the individual branches of government. What is Congress responsible for? What is the president responsible for? What is the judiciary responsible for? And you will not be probably surprised, but you will, I think we'd all be sad to know, people don't exactly have it right. And the reason I would argue, based looking at the numbers and what the feedback, was because frankly, the president has taken on so much power as of late, they now think that power belongs to him. How do you go about getting that back? I mean, this president's been particularly bad. Others have also overstepped their bounds, but people really think he has the right to set the full agenda and spend the money.
We can get there. The way we have to get there is by instructing people, informing them, reminding them of our country's history, of how we became a country, of why we set our Constitution up the way that we did. It's one of the reasons why I wrote a book. It's called Our Lost Constitution. It came out a few months ago. All 12 people who have read it have really enjoyed it. But one of the reasons
How many kids do you have that read it?
Yes, that's including my 3 children. One of the reasons I wrote the book, though, was to remind people of how we got to the point where we adopted the Constitution we have. And one of the things that we have to remember is that every single member, every delegate to the Constitutional Convention understood at the outset of the convention that George Washington was going to be our first president. They knew that. And they loved George Washington. He was probably the single most respected man in the world at the time, certainly in the Western Hemisphere, probably the entire world. They loved him. He could do no wrong. And yet, notwithstanding their great love for this great father of our nation, they intentionally designed a very weak presidency. You look at the Constitution, the president has relatively few powers. And this was because they understand something that we have lost in our culture, in our society today, which is that power is pretty dangerous unless you really check it, especially when it's vested in one person. And so the more we can remind people of that, the more we will be able as a society to change the face of Congress, change the actions of Congress, so that Congress exercises its own power rather than handing it all over to the president's branch. It's not until we as a society remind ourselves of that we will win. But we will win because we in this room know this, and we'll make sure that everyone around us knows it as well.
It is all about education. It is what Jefferson said, informing our citizens' discretion. It's amazing to me how every school child in America knows exactly what to put into a recycle bin, yet they know next to nothing. They know next to nothing about our Constitution, about the rule of law, about separation of powers. And Franklin's eternal question, after having written the Constitution in the first place, and we all know the famous anecdote, the lady shouts out to him, "Mr. Franklin, what kind of government have you given us?" Answer, "A republic, if you can keep it." And to keep that republic, we have to make sure that people understand the Constitution is not a dusty antiquity or relic to be found at the archives, but it is the bedrock foundation of our republic, of our freedoms, of our prosperity. It is not a bowl of Jell-O. It is not an antiquity. It is foundation. It is bedrock. It has to be treated that way, and it is the greatest document conceived for the insurance of liberty ever conceived by the mind of man.
Dennis, one thing, though, we found very encouraging in the study was that the phrase, "we the people," people really responded to. And the fact that anybody would be infringing upon what we the people wanted really bothered them. So it would seem that if we could get the message out there that the best way for we the people to be represented and to have their voice heard in Washington is through their elected representatives who individually represent them, their states here, that we'd go a long way in convincing folks power. We have 3 branches, but Congress really should be the most powerful.
That's why what you're doing is so important, because look, let's be honest, there's an elephant in the room, and I always say, recognize the elephant. There is almost a revolt among many Republicans about the fact that, hey, we got the Senate and we got the House, and what do we have to show for it? And if it... this is my description of it is not an assertion of the frailty of the people we elected. We elected some wonderful human beings like you, but we have to answer that question. Yep. That's what this is all about. That's what you're fighting. But that, in a nutshell, is what is driving so many conservatives in America crazy.
That's right. Elections should have consequences.
Yes.
They should. They haven't often on the conservative side. I want to make sure that we really help people understand where they can learn more about this. It's the Article 1 project that you all are co-leading. What can the audience, what can they take from it? Where can they go to learn more about it?
They can go to our Facebook page at /Article 1 Project. Again, this is about we the people, not me, the government. We need your input. We need your help. And again, there is a reason that Congress was put into Article 1 of the Constitution, not Article 2, Article 3. And, you know, our job contracts come up for renewal, his every 6 years, my every 2 years. These bureaucrats' job contracts never come up for renewal. For we the people to reclaim our government, we have got to reclaim Article 1 of the Constitution. We invite you all to be a part of it.
And let me ask you this, clap, you can applaud that, that's good. Do you have anybody on the Democratic side, the left side, who is teaming up with you or that you think that is going to be friendly to this cause?
Not yet, but we do believe that this is something that in time could grow into something that's bipartisan. Understand, this is not an idea, even though it's an idea that most of us as conservatives hopefully agree with. It's not an idea that by its very nature has to be distinctively either conservative or liberal or Republican or Democratic. These are just basic fundamental tenets. This is Civics 101. In fact, this is 7th grade civics. The fact that we have one branch of our 3 branches of the federal government whose job it is to make law. That's really what we're talking about here. We want those people to be in charge of making law. And one final word on that point. The whole reason we got off on this course, on this detour, was that years ago, a lot of people said we need to take some of the policy making out of politics, and we need to put it in the hands of experts. That sounds really nice, because no one likes politics. I mean, most people say, well, politics, that's icky, that's yucky. The fact that people who are making federal policy, making federal law, answer to the people at regular intervals every 2 years or every 6 years makes us accountable to the people. It is the only way. So don't fall for the line that convinces you to surrender your freedom to the tyranny of expertise.
Hear, hear.
Here. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me thank 3 champions for We the People in Washington and across this country. Dennis Prager, Congressman Hensarling, Senator Lee, thank you.
Thank you very much.